Continuing now, I'm your host, Ryan Gorman, and right now, let me bring in George Jagodzinski, co-founder of Intevity and host of the Intevity Podcast. He's here to talk about the future of work and navigating a transformative period for businesses and workers. George, thanks so much for coming on the show, and let's start with this transformative time that we're in, especially as it relates to work and the workplace. Was this a transformation that was already in motion before the pandemic, and how much have the challenges of the past few years sped up those changes?
It accelerated a lot. You were seeing this transformation happen a little bit prior to it. Ourselves, we've been a virtual company for 20 years. And I'd say year by year, people looked at us a little bit less weird. You know, they started to become more comfortable with it, and they saw that we had a competitive advantage, that we could attract talent wherever they lived.
Focusing on workers for a minute, we have a big disruption taking place. You have a lot of employees looking for other opportunities because there are so many job openings out there. A lot of people are calling it the Great Resignation, people looking for a situation with a potential job that better fits the life they want to live. Talk a little bit about that and taking a 30,000-foot view look at how all of that is playing out. How is it impacting work in this country?
Yeah, well, I think there's multiple things happening all at once. A lot of it fueled by the pandemic, but also just given the timing that we're at, is people are realizing that they can work different ways, and they want to. And once you open Pandora's box, it can't be closed again. There's also tremendous just mental burden that people have been carrying the last couple of years, whether they notice it or not. And you're seeing that bleed into work, where they have stress, they have mental health that needs to be addressed, and that's playing itself out in work as well. And then people are also just chasing their passions. And so what this means is, I don't think that it means a giant change. I think that it means you need to do the fundamentals better. You need to treat people with respect. You need to give them the freedom and the flexibility to work the best way that they do. And there's another interesting factor that's coming to play right now, which is really embracing neurodiversity, the different ways that people work, and really embracing them for whatever their unique superpower is.
Now, with all of this disruption happening, what are you seeing from companies? Do you see a lot of companies pushing back on this change, or do you see a lot of companies taking a look at the landscape and saying, well, this is inevitable, we've got to figure out the best way that we can adjust to make all of this work best for us?
You do see pockets of companies pushing back on him. It's some of the old school thinking. I mean, you look at Elon Musk, and he's threatening everyone to come in. I think that's more a cover for him to conduct layoffs, more so than that's really what he wants. But, I think that most companies, they do want to embrace this, but it's hard and it's complicated, or at least they view it as hard and complicated. They've got investments in offices. They scramble at different ways to do this. They'll pick a couple days that people come into the office, but that ends up kind of weird because you have some people that are in the office, some people that aren't. Yeah. So now you have people just driving into the office to sit on Zoom all day, which is even sillier than what it was before. And so what we see really working for organizations is embracing the team and allowing the team format to determine what works for them. So if you're structuring highly performing teams of 6, 8, 10, 15 people, letting them define what their team structure and their team culture is going to be, rather than these big, broad company mandates coming down.
I'm Ryan Gorman, joined by George Jagodzinski, co-founder of Intevity and host of the Intevity Podcast. I know when work from home first started to take off during the pandemic, a lot of companies were concerned, are we going to be able to keep up with our productivity levels given this new environment? Now that we're into this quite a bit, what have we seen on that front?
You're seeing productivity, at least in the places where it's being embraced, the remote and hybrid work, you're seeing a big improvement on it. Us being remote for so long, what we've learned is that it forces you to embrace accountability and enforces you to embrace teams having their own autonomy and being empowered to make decisions. And so we're seeing a lot of that throughput just increase as these teams are given more of that freedom to do that. I say what's also interesting is there were a lot of companies that tapped out local talent markets. And those companies now are able to get talent outside of those cities that they're in. I mean, for us, we would sometimes get clients because they couldn't find talent anymore, so they reached out to consulting companies like ourselves. But now they can really build out a broader workforce.
Let me ask you about the issue of inflation, which is a top issue right now for businesses, consumers, employers, employees. We don't know how long inflation is going to remain at these levels. And if you have employees saying, hey, you know, that work from home setup, that's so beneficial for me right now, especially with $5 gas, the cost of going to and from work. How does that potentially impact some of those work from home, remote work decisions that businesses have to make?
Well, first and foremost, inflation, what it's driving companies to do is shift from a growth mindset to more of a optimized mindset. How do we get the most out of the teams that we have? Because a lot of times automation traditionally was used more for scale and speed and quality. Those are all growth, but now it's really optimized. And the fact of the matter is, people get worried about automation replacing jobs, but I can't tell you how many highly talented and highly skilled people are out there doing tedious things that could easily be automated, scheduling, approving expenses, what have you. And so these organizations are leaning heavily into that automation to free up the resources that they do have to do the more important work. And also they're going to have to compete harder in these markets. So they want to free up those resources so that they can provide higher quality service to their consumers.
On the topic of consumers, how is all of this disruption and transformation impacting the relationships between different businesses and consumers and the people who they're serving?
Yeah, this is another example of where the pandemic, it just accelerated and magnified something that was already happening, which is the level of expectations that consumers have with brands that they interact with has been rising and rising and rising. And now it's at a point that they just have the extremely high expectations of these organizations. And so what these companies need to do and these brands need to do is, one, they need to invest more into really the brand culture, really pulling Peloton's kind of gone a different way now, but they were really building that culture around their product and really investing in that. And then also what they need to do is meet the consumers where they want to be met and where they need to be met. It's much more important now.
Taking a look forward, it's very hard to predict the future these days. It's hard to predict what's going to happen, a week, a month from now. But looking at where all of this is headed, especially in a post-pandemic world, what are some of the things that you'll be watching for as this transformation of work continues down the road?
Well, I think what's going to be interesting is to see how the dust settles. And there's going to be a lot of companies that do this well, and then a lot of companies that don't do this well. And if the economy does go really south, I think you're going to see a fair amount of consolidation within companies. And then you're going to see a workforce that is getting that much more spread out. I think we're going to see a lot of investments into ESG. So that's environment, social, and governance. Companies are rethinking the way that they have to deal with their supply chains and manufacturing and sourcing. And what's interesting is that sustainability aspect of it actually gives them better resilience and also stronger bottom line. So I think you're going to see the workforce and the companies become so much more resilient and stronger from this. I mean, we're collectively being faced with a strong challenge, and we'll get over it like we have other industrial revolutions and other challenges and be stronger for it on the other side.
And then final question for you. How difficult is it to plan ahead, to look that far in advance for different companies with the volatility that we're seeing and with things changing as much and as quickly as they have recently?
It can be very tough. Historically, when we work with clients on their strategy, they have 3 to 5 goals that they want to accomplish. Now their top goal is just flexibility and resilience. I'm like, well, how the heck do you just plan for that? Because that's really expensive to do that,
Yeah.
So it's very, very tough. I had someone on my podcast, Tom Goodwin, the way he talks about it is you need to think about not what's going to change, but what's going to stay the same. And I really like that concept as well. There's some fundamental things that aren't going to change. People need to get certain goods. They need to have certain services. They're going to live in a certain way, and that's not going to change.
All right. George Jagodzinski, co-founder of Intevity. He's also host of the Intevity Podcast, which I highly recommend. George, fascinating conversation. Thanks so much for taking the time to come on the show.
Thanks so much for having me. I really enjoyed it.